Okay, let's just jump right in and try to unpack this. Because if you're a parent or an educator or really just anyone paying attention to the future of learning, you're hearing this constant message. It's everywhere, isn't it? Every conference, every headline.
It is. It's a constant chorus.
KI will change education. Digital learning is the future. And the
Mm.
big one, schools have to adapt or they'll become irrelevant.
Right. And that narrative, it's very powerful. It plays on a very real fear, a fear of being left behind.
It feels urgent, almost dramatic, and to be honest, a little overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. And that's why, as teachers, as mentors, we have to learn to filter that noise. Our deep dive today is really about getting into the practical reality of this whole digital shift.
Moving past the headlines.
Exactly. We need to focus on a question that gets kind of obscured by all the shiny new technology.
And what's that question?
Is all this integration of AI and digital tools really improving the depth of learning? Or were we maybe just using it to mask deeper gaps? Pedagogical gaps, systemic gaps that were already there to begin with.
That's such a crucial distinction. The idea of looking technologically advanced versus actually being pedagogically advanced.
Yes.
Because you see it all the time. Schools proudly announcing, we have new screens, we have smart dashboards, AI writing assistants. And to the community, to parents, that looks like progress.
It signals progress.
No.
But our sources today make it very clear that the quality of learning, true learning, it remains stubbornly dependent on human factors.
So things like the teacher's intention, the rigor of the curriculum.
The quality of the engagement. Good old-fashioned pedagogy, that's the core of it.
So that's the real essence of what we need to get into today.
That's right. We have to move past what I call the educator illusion. Or for parents, it becomes the parent illusion.
And what is that illusion exactly?
It's this comfortable, but I think dangerously false assumption that just adding more digital stuff, more apps, more screen time, more AI automatically leads to better learning.
Or makes our kids more globally competitive.
Precisely. It's comforting to see the metrics, the usage dashboards go up, but the child's internal framework, their ability to think for themselves, that might actually be collapsing.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear then. It's not just to list what tech the different boards are using.
No, not at all.
It's to critically analyze how they're using it, to look past the hype and really understand the practical, on-the-ground reality for major educational frameworks. We're talking CBSE, the state boards, and of course, the IB.
And, crucially, what all of this demands from us. From the conscious guiding teacher in the classroom.
Right. What does it mean for our daily practice?
Exactly. And I think the foundational lesson, the wisdom we can get from all this is pretty simple. Technology is an amplifier. It's not a creator.
An amplifier. I like that. So it doesn't make something out of nothing.
It can't. Technology will not magically generate critical thinking. It won't build discipline on its own. It doesn't instill ethics or spark genuine curiosity.
It just takes what's already there and makes it bigger or faster.
And if the core system or the child's own approach to learning is weak, well, technology will just expose and accelerate that weakness dramatically. We're aiming for conscious teaching that uses technology, not just technologically assisted delivery that blindly relies on it.
Okay, so before we get into the specifics of, say, the CBSE or the IB, we need some clarity. For a new teacher, an aspiring teacher, trying to navigate all this, the jargon can be a bit much.
It's constant.
So let's establish some clear definitions. What do we actually mean when we say digital learning versus AI-assisted learning in a real classroom context?
That's a great place to start. Defining these terms helps us set proper expectations for what the technology can and, more importantly, what it cannot do. So digital learning, based on our sources, is primarily about content delivery through technology.
Okay, so it's about the medium.
It's a shift in format. Think about digitized textbooks on portals like VIECCCE, or recorded video lectures that supplement or even replace a live teacher, online homework submissions, basic interactive simulations instead of a physical model in a lab.
So the technology is basically the transport system for the information.
Exactly. The information itself is often static or maybe minimally interactive. It's about modernizing access and delivery.
Got it. Now, what about AI-assisted learning? That sounds like a much bigger leap.
It is a much more profound shift in the actual interaction. AI-assisted learning involves a far higher level of dynamism. We're talking about sophisticated systems that can give adaptive feedback.
Meaning it changes based on what the student's doing.
Yes, it adjusts the difficulty of questions in real time based on the student's performance. It uses pattern recognition to diagnose common mistakes across a whole class.
So it could flag that, say, 70% of the class is struggling with a specific concept.
And it can flag specific students who need intervention. And then the other big piece is the automation of routine tasks.
Like grading.
Exactly. Large-scale, automated grading of quizzes or generating personalized practice worksheets to target a student's known weak spots. The system is starting to react to the student, not just transmit to them.
Okay, those definitions are really helpful. But you've made the point that neither of these automatically guarantees deep understanding. Where does it usually go wrong? Where is that pedagogical failure point?
The central failure point is the gap between technological fluency and conceptual depth.
Fluency versus depth. Unpack that for us.
Well, the digital environment is designed to be intuitive, right? It's designed for efficiency, so a child can get incredibly good at clicking the right buttons, navigating complex dashboards, finding information quickly. They look busy, they look productive,
Yeah.
they look highly engaged with the technology.
But the thinking is shallow.
Profoundly shallow.
Can you give us a really practical classroom example of what that shallow thinking looks like?
Of course, let's imagine a complex math problem. To solve it, you need to go through 3 distinct steps. You have to identify the variables, then formulate the right equations, and only then do you execute the calculation.
Right, a process.
A process. Now, the shallow thinker, armed with a powerful AI tool, does what? They go straight to the tool, input the problem, and get the final, perfectly structured solution.
And they copy it down.
They copy it or they lightly rephrase it. The final answer on their paper looks correct. It's perfect. But the student never went through the necessary intellectual struggle.
They didn't have to formulate the equations themselves?
They engaged in what we call an answer-first approach. They outsourced the thinking.
So what happens then when that student is in an exam and the AI isn't there? Or maybe the problem is slightly different, it's novel, and they have to figure it out from scratch.
That is the exact moment that the intellectual atrophy becomes crippling. The skill, the mental muscle required to generate that answer on their own has either deteriorated or, even worse, it was never fully formed in the first place.
So the real danger isn't the AI itself.
Never. The real danger is our tendency as educators and as a system to let it foster this outsourcing thinking culture, this shortcut learning mindset. When students learn to prioritize getting the result quickly over the slow, often frustrating process of reasoning, we are failing them.
This sounds exactly like what you called the fragility trap. It feels like we're accidentally training students who can't handle anything new or ambiguous without a digital crutch.
The fragility trap is the most pressing risk we face. It's very real. If our teaching focuses only on how to get the right results quickly, we are creating learners who are fragile ready.
Fragile red.
They function perfectly, beautifully within known automated systems. But the future, the real world, it demands future-ready thinkers. People who can adapt, who can reason ethically, who can synthesize solutions to problems that don't even exist yet.
And for which AI has no pre-existing template.
Exactly. When that fragile learner is faced with high pressure or a novel situation or an ethical gray area, they collapse. They don't have the internal framework that's built only through persistent, independent intellectual struggle.
That's a powerful idea. It completely reframes how we should be measuring success as teachers. It's about scrutinizing the process, not just the speed or the final outcome.
The process is everything.
But I have to ask a tough question here. From the perspective of a student, trying to get into a top university, in those high-stakes competitive exams, speed does matter.
It does.
So isn't there a risk that if we tell students to slow down, to avoid the AI shortcut, and just focus on reasoning, that we're actually disadvantaging them in those timed exams that reward efficiency?
That is a brilliant and deeply practical question. It really gets to the core tension of modern education, and the answer requires a lot of wisdom and balance. We are not and should never be advocating for the rejection of efficiency. AI and digital tools are fantastic for execution, for speed, for handling huge amounts of data. But here is the critical sequence. Before a student is allowed to become hyper-efficient, they must first master the inefficient struggle of foundational thinking.
So the inefficiency is deliberate. It's like the necessary workout for the brain.
That's a perfect analogy. You have to build the muscle first. We must separate the teaching phase from the testing phase. During the learning and teaching part of it, we must demand reasoning. We can even set a rule. No digital tool is allowed to formulate the core concept of your argument.
So you build the foundation first, without the tool.
Once the student has proven they have that mastery, Once they can do the calculation or structure the essay on their own, then we introduce the AI. And we say, okay, now use this tool to make your process faster. Use it to check for errors. Use it to improve your efficiency.
So you're training the master craftsman before you hand them the power tool.
We have to ensure intellectual ownership. The question that separates quality education from just digital delivery is this: how does the school teach thinking in the presence of AI?
Not just, does the school use AI?
That's a low-bar question. The real question is how. If a school can clearly show how their use of AI is designed to enhance critical analysis, to deepen ethical reflection, to force students to explain their reasoning out loud, then they are using it consciously. If they're just using AI to boost test scores or automate lesson plans, they're falling right into the fragility trap. The presence of technology actually demands a more conscious, a more intentional pedagogy from us, not a lazier one. We have to guard that intellectual struggle. It's the most valuable thing in the classroom.
Okay, so let's take that critical lens now and apply it to the major educational boards. Let's start with the CBSE, which is just massive. It operates at a national scale in India. The sheer diversity of the population it serves is incredible. And any reform they make, especially under the new national education policy, the NEP, has these huge binding consequences for millions and millions of students.
The scale of the CBSE transition is, well, it's staggering. It's one of the largest educational shifts happening anywhere in the world. And you're right to mention the national education policy. The NEP is the real driver here. It's a massive structural reform aiming to reshape education from the ground up.
Moving away from rote memorization.
Exactly. Towards critical thinking, multidisciplinary studies, skills development, and CBSE is using digitalization specifically to achieve two huge national goals: standardization and access.
And for teachers and parents who are navigating this, what are the specific digital resources they should really know about, the ones that form the foundation of this shift?
The infrastructure is built on a few key pillars, all designed for open access, which is so important. First, you have the digital textbooks and all sorts of learning resources on the D.ED platform. This is a centralized national repository.
So everyone gets the same core material.
Everyone gets free access to the core insert content. That immediately tackles barriers of cost and just physical distribution of books. It's a huge step for equity. Second, to support the NEP's focus, they've developed these extensive competency-based question banks.
To align the tests with the new way of thinking.
Precisely. To test skills, application, and analysis, not just simple recall of facts.
That term competency-based questions is so important. But for a teacher or a student who is used to the old way, what does that actually mean in practice? Can you give us a comparison?
Yes, absolutely. Let's take a simple science topic, like, say, the structure of a plant. An old-style, recall-based question might be, define photosynthesis and list the raw materials required. It's pure memory.
I remember those questions.
We all do. Now, a new competency-based question would be something completely different. It might be, a farmer is facing crop failure. The region has high CO2 levels but very little sunlight. Design a potential vertical farming solution for this farmer. Justify your choice of light source, nutrient delivery, and predict the yield based on the limiting factor principle.
Wow. Okay. That is a completely different kind of question. It requires you to synthesize information, apply principles, solve a problem.
And justify your reasoning. It's a genuine thinking exercise. It proves you can apply the concept, not just define it. And the third digital pillar, which is crucial, is the online teacher training modules, because they recognize that the teacher has to be upskilled to deliver this new pedagogy.
Right. You can't just hand them the new tools and expect it to work.
You have to train the human element.
So from an organizational perspective, the strengths of the CBSE approach are pretty clear. You have massive standardization, you have equity through free content, and this clear alignment with exam readiness through the new competency training.
Those strengths are undeniable, and for a nation of this size and scale, they are absolutely necessary. However, the real challenge is in the ground reality, the implementation.
This is where that friction comes in that our sources mention. The medium becomes modern, but the mindset stays old. What does that actually look like in a classroom?
It looks like technological substitution instead of technological transformation.
Substitution, not transformation.
Yes. So instead of using a new digital tool to spark an inquiry-based project or a collaborative debate, a teacher might just substitute an old analog method with a digital one. For example, instead of a deep, probing explanation in class, they just play a polished, pre-recorded video lecture from D.ED.
Or instead of a rich class discussion, it's just a rapid-fire digital quiz.
A quiz that still only tests low-level recall, even though it's being done on a fancy new tablet. The tool is modern, but the teaching habit is old.
So they're missing the real opportunity, the pedagogical leverage that the new tools offer.
They are. The system is designed for efficiency and scale, which means AI implementation naturally gets concentrated in the areas that are easy to measure and automate.
Like practice questions, performance analytics, test prep.
Utilitarian things, they help achieve massive metrics, but they're not necessarily fostering deep thinking.
And what areas of AI use are less developed in this kind of large-scale model?
The AI is less used in the areas that are vital for, holistic human development, for wisdom and judgment. Things like ethical reasoning scenarios, complex interdisciplinary projects that AI has a hard time structuring, assessing creativity, or the nuances of collaboration.
Things that are harder to automate and score.
Exactly. So they get less attention in a system that's focused on measurable, standardized outcomes.
And the implication there is pretty serious. You could be creating hyper-efficient exam takers.
Who might be failing to develop as independent, resilient, and morally grounded thinkers.
So for a conscious teacher, someone working within the CBSE framework, how do you fight back against that systemic pull towards just efficiency? How do you mitigate that?
We have to remember that the goal of education isn't just the highest score. It's the formation of the self, the moral and intellectual character of the student. So our guidance for aspiring teachers has to be one of active protection.
Active protection. What does that look like day to day, especially with all the pressure for high marks from parents and the system?
First, we have to constantly frame these digital tools, no matter how advanced they seem, as supplements. They're never replacements for core human instruction and interaction. Second, we must create non-negotiable moments of what I call unassisted thought.
Unassisted thought.
The teacher has to actively demand that students explain their reasoning aloud. If a student uses an AI tool and produces a brilliant answer very quickly, the teacher's job isn't over. It's just beginning.
The follow-up question is key.
The follow-up question is everything. You say, that is an exceptional final answer. Now, put the device away and explain to me, in your own words, the 3 conceptual hurdles you had to overcome to get there.
Yeah.
What were the first steps of your thinking process?
That forces the mental heavy lifting that the tool allowed them to bypass. It's about measuring intellectual ownership.
Intellectual ownership. That is the teacher's core mandate in the age of AI. And beyond that, we have to teach students to find and critique the errors that AI will inevitably make.
And treat that as a learning moment.
Treat it as a moment of intellectual triumph. We say, you, the human, you spotted the machine's mistake. That is the school that makes you valuable. That separates you from the algorithm.
Yeah.
By limiting this blind AI dependence and constantly prioritizing the reasoning process over the speed of the answer, we can make sure CBSE's amazing resources empower students rather than accidentally crippling their intellectual growth.
So the standardization and access from CBSE is a fantastic starting point, a necessary foundation.
The tremendous foundation.
But its ultimate success in creating those resilient, future-ready thinkers depends entirely on the conscious, intentional pedagogy of the human teacher in the room.
Precisely. The system gives you the map, but the teacher has to guide the journey. If the teacher focuses only on speed, the students will become efficient but fragile. If the teacher insists on depth, the students will become resilient. And you know what? The speed will come naturally after they've achieved true mastery.
Okay, let's shift our focus now to the state boards. We're moving from a system that's all about centralization and standardization to one that is defined by just, massive variability. The sources call this the uneven digital landscape, which must create a whole different set of challenges for teachers.
It creates systemic challenges that just compound the daily difficulties of teaching. You're absolutely right. While CBSE aims for uniformity, the state boards reflect the stark realities, the geographical, the economic realities of different regions.
So the variation in digital adoption is huge.
Immense. You could have a magnet school in a major city with fantastic infrastructure, smart boards, one-to-one devices. But just 50 kilometers away, a rural school might be struggling with intermittent power, no stable internet, or maybe one shared computer for an entire class of 50 students.
So even if a state board announces a really progressive digital policy, the actual implementation just falls apart on the ground because of these basic infrastructure issues and probably a lack of consistent, high-quality teacher training compared to what CBSE can offer centrally.
That's correct. And it's so important how we frame the consequences of this. This is systemic inequality that impacts a child's future. It is not a reflection of that child's potential or the effort of their local teacher.
That's a vital distinction.
This digital gap leads to serious content access issues. Students just miss out on resources that their peers in better-equipped schools take completely for granted. And that lack of exposure, both digital and conceptual, makes it incredibly hard for them to transition and compete later on, whether that's for university or for jobs. They just haven't been taught to navigate the modern information world.
For a teacher or a parent inside a resource-constrained state board system, that must feel, well, paralyzing. You're trying to prepare a child for a global digital future, but you're working with basically 20th century tools. And waiting for the whole system to catch up could take years, years that a child just doesn't have.
And this is where our role as mentors has to shift. We have to move from just criticizing the system's limitations to empowering conscious intervention. Waiting is not an option if we want to protect a child's opportunities.
Yeah.
So supplementation becomes a form of necessary protection, not just a privilege.
Protection against systemic barriers. I like that reframing. It's proactive. So what are some practical home supplementation strategies that a teacher, acting as a guide, can advise parents to use, even if they have limited resources themselves?
We have to advise very targeted, very intentional supplementation. It should be focused on building agency and foundational skills. The priority has to be conceptual mastery that the school might not be able to consistently support. So first, encourage the structured use of targeted, free online resources for core subjects.
Not just random videos on the internet?
No, not random videos.
Yeah.
Highly structured courses that focus on rigorous math, science, language, foundational skills. Even if the only access a child has is through a parent's shared smartphone, for an hour every evening, that 1 hour needs to be intensely focused on core concepts.
Okay, that's the first step. What's next?
Second, and this is so important for future readiness, teachers should guide students to proactively build their own independent digital portfolios.
How does a student in a low-resource environment do that if the school doesn't require it or provide a platform?
It's about teaching the discipline of documentation, not just checking a box for a school requirement. The portfolio can be something as simple as a free Google Drive folder or a free website builder. The teacher's role is to assign projects that must be documented digitally, regardless of how it's submitted. For example, after they finish a research paper, they have to organize their sources, their drafts, their final paper, and a short reflection into a clearly labeled digital folder. It teaches digital self-curation. That is a non-negotiable skill for the future.
That covers the output and the documentation. What about AI literacy and ethics? That seems like the area that would be lagging the furthest behind in these systems.
That is the third, and maybe the most critical, intervention. Since the formal curriculum is slow to adapt, the teacher has to empower the parent to teach responsible, ethical AI usage directly at home. And this isn't about complex coding. It's about instilling core values.
Critical thinking.
We have to teach children to look at AI critically, to ask questions like, does this answer sound authoritative? Can I verify this information? Does it cite its sources? This builds the muscle of critical evaluation. Even without access to a fancy AI tool, the core lessons of authorship, integrity, and questioning digital information. These are life skills you can teach with simple online examples and a good conversation.
So the key lesson for students in state board systems is really resilience through targeted conscious exposure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They can and do adapt very effectively, but only when that deliberate digital intervention is added. The truth is, the state boards are complex and they will digitize unevenly. We can't afford to wait for the system to be perfect. Our job as conscious educators is to provide the roadmap for that necessary supplementation. We need to help transform parents into primary digital mentors, empowering families to become active agents in their own digital readiness. We have to make sure systemic barriers don't end up costing them their future.
All right, let's turn now to the International Baccalaureate, or the IB system. And this offers such a powerful contrast, doesn't it? It's globally focused, it usually has smaller class sizes, and it's structurally designed for really comprehensive integration of technology.
It's the perfect characterization. For the IB, technology isn't an optional add-on or just a delivery system. It is an intrinsic thinking tool. It's a mandatory documentation system. And it's a core ethical challenge that they address explicitly and head-on.
Their goal is different. It's about rigorous intellectual development and also ensuring that a student's academic record is maximally portable globally.
It moves far beyond just standardization.
So what does that comprehensive integration actually look like in practice? What are the mandatory digital components that are just woven into the fabric of IB assessment?
The structure is, well, it's demanding, and it's continuous. IB students are required to maintain these highly detailed e-portfolios throughout their entire 2-year program. And these are just static files. They're dynamic digital records that show skill development and reflective growth over time.
So it's a living document.
A living document. It contains their internal assessment records, which often have multimedia components. It houses their extended essay, their theory of knowledge reflection, both of which demand meticulous digital documentation and citation.
Hmm.
And of course, there are the regular reflective journals. All of it is digitally integrated and all of it is assessed.
The source material highlighted how this process creates a highly portable and comprehensive academic identity. For a student, why is that so much more powerful than just a traditional transcript with grades on it?
Because in today's global university admissions landscape, a student needs more than just a final score. The IB's digital framework forces students to capture the process of their learning, not just the final outcome.
It tells the story of how they got to the answer.
Exactly. The e-portfolios, the reflections, the internal assessments, they all function as this curated, irrefutable evidence of sustained inquiry, of critical thinking, of academic rigor over a long period of time. So when an admissions officer looks at an IB student's file, they're not just seeing a test result. They're seeing a documented chronological journey of intellectual effort, of self-correction, of mastery. That richness creates a highly trustworthy academic identity that proves the learning wasn't a fluke. It was a sustained discipline.
And that focus on the process seems like a direct antidote to the fragility trap we were talking about earlier. Now, let's talk about AI ethics in this kind of environment. How does the IB explicitly handle teaching about academic integrity and AI?
They approach it head on. They treat the ethical use of AI as a necessary part of becoming intellectually mature. IB explicitly mandates teaching about academic integrity, originality, and authorship right from the start of the program. Students are trained to see AI as maybe an advanced research assistant or a drafting partner. It's useful for gathering data or restructuring a sentence.
But it's not a co-pilot.
Never an intellectual co-pilot that shares responsibility for the final content.
Is there a core mantra or a guiding principle they instill in students to help them navigate this?
There is, and it's one that I think every conscious teacher should adopt regardless of the system they're in. The mantra is, AI may assist, but responsibility remains human.
Responsibility remains human.
This is future preparation at its absolute finest. It prepares them for a professional world where advanced tools are always present, but the human user retains full legal, ethical, and professional responsibility for the output. They have to be able to justify the intellectual contribution they added after the AI was used, often in a reflective journal or a bibliography that lists all the aids they used.
So the system requires you not only to use the tool correctly, but also to understand the reasoning behind what it produced and to articulate your own ethical stance on its use. It forces that conscious engagement.
Exactly. It safeguards that intellectual struggle because the student knows that the AI-generated answer, no matter how perfect it looks, is worthless unless they can defend its logic and prove their independent ownership of the final synthesis. It's a very robust pedagogical defense against outsourcing your thinking.
But even in a system this well-designed, there have to be some unintended consequences, some hidden costs, especially with those intensive documentation requirements. What should educators in these kinds of high-demand systems be wary of?
The biggest unintended consequence is what we can call cognitive overload or documentation fatigue.
Documentation fatigue.
Yes, the system demands constant submissions. It requires incredibly intensive documentation, reflective journals, detailed process records, evidence of CAS hours, assessment documentation. And this sheer volume, while it ensures rigor, can lead to significant student burnout and exhaustion.
So the technology is integrated, but if the volume of meta-reflection, reflecting on your reflection and documentation becomes overwhelming, then the creativity and the actual joy of learning can start to drop.
That's the precise danger.
The student's focus can shift from deeply exploring an idea to just fulfilling the documentation requirement.
And that is a tragedy. The technology, which was designed to make assessment more transparent and holistic, can ironically become just another performance metric focused on pure output volume. We have to issue a really clear warning to all educators in these highly integrated systems. Technology must be managed consciously. It should never be worshipped as an end in itself. If the tools are primarily just increasing the workload without proportionally increasing a student's joy in exploration or their ability to get genuine mental rest, then the system is accidentally undermining its own long-term goal.
So the success of this whole IB model really hinges on finding a critical human balance, managing time and mental energy.
It hinges on a few non-negotiable human elements. It requires sophisticated time management from the student, which has to be supported by the teacher and the parent. It works best when parents truly understand the high expectations and prioritize their child's mental well-being over just continuous output. The goal must be to prepare children for AI-present futures, where they master the tool and own their thinking, not AI-dependent ones, where the tool manages them and their mind begins to atrophy. The rigor is essential, but that human balance is absolutely non-negotiable. #outro. So as we bring this deep dive to a close, I think the core lesson for any conscious educator, it remains constant across all three of these systems we've looked at: CBSE, state boards, and the IB.
And what's that core lesson?
Before we celebrate the rollout of any new technology, before we get excited about a new tool, we have to pause first. We must assess the foundational human capabilities of the child that exist completely independent of that technology.
So we have to put those core human skills back under the microscope. Deliberately take away the technological scaffolding, whether it's a simple digital textbook or a sophisticated AI, and just see what's left, what knowledge, what judgment, what resilience is actually there.
Exactly. And we have to ask ourselves the critical final questions for reflection. These are the human measures of success that go beyond any digital interface. Every teacher should be asking these questions daily.
What are they?
First, can the child think effectively? Can they structure an argument or solve a new problem without immediately reaching for a tool? Second, can they articulate and explain their reasoning clearly in their own words, proving they own the idea? Third, can they spot and address the inevitable errors and biases that AI generates, showing superior human critical judgment? And maybe most importantly, can they act ethically? Can they maintain their academic integrity and resist that powerful temptation to outsource their mind, even when they're under intense cognitive or time pressure?
The educational systems, the boards, they're adapting at incredible speed. But the job of the human educator, it really is timeless, isn't it? It's focused entirely on those core attributes: judgment, resilience, ethical character.
That is the enduring wisdom.
And the future workplace, whether we're talking about competitive universities or cutting-edge industries, they're going to move past just rewarding digital fluency pretty quickly. They'll pay a premium for human judgment, for adaptability, for responsibility, and for that kind of deep critical reasoning that only comes from struggle and from conscious teaching.
It's the only thing that matters in the end. Technology is an inevitable, powerful force. It's reshaping education, it's offering incredible access. But it will never, ever replace the necessity of developing thinking, strong values, and personal discipline. The systems will all adapt at their own different speeds, but the responsibility of the teacher is constant. It's immediate. And that responsibility is to ensure that our children do not outsource their minds, their ethical frameworks, or their intellectual struggle in the process of becoming digitally literate.
A profound and I think a very necessary guide for all of us as we get ready to teach in this complex new world. Thank you for giving us that framework for conscious action.
The power to guide this next generation lies within your conscious intention. You have the wisdom. Now go and teach joyfully and protect the mind above all else.